Well, in part one of carving the owl, we got the eye position established. We got the back of the wingtips marked in and established where those are. We drew in some good reference lines here, the widest point on the bird and the center line around the outside of the bird. So now what we're going to do in part two here is we're going to actually go ahead and round off the bird. Before we do the actual rounding off, you want to make sure that you get some more reference drawn in. You'll need to draw in some detail around the facial disc and the bill and a little bit on the like side position on the facial disc. Like if you look at where everything is on the side view here. So we're going to start by drawing in the facial disc here. And we would have earlier on a previous in session one, we would have put a little pinprick through here at the bottom of the bill. You should still have a little, I know it's hard to see on the video, but I can see it here. Little point there. That'll be the lowest point of the bill. That'll be the little bottom point on the bill. So I'm just going to draw that in. And then the facial disc kind of comes around to the bottom of the bottom of things here. And what you want to do, it's mostly this area in the middle is the part that's probably most important to you right now, because you're going to be carving away all the stuff on the outer corners here. So you draw this in. You can probably just set that in place and just kind of look where the top of this eyebrow is. If you want, you could also line everything up and take the little pin and put a few little pin pricks in there to help establish where you need to be. But this is the top of the eyebrow. And looking at it from the side, you'll see that the facial disc comes back basically like the front part of the facial disc comes back maybe within not quite a quarter of an inch of the center line. So you just kind of sketch that in. That's just to indicate where you want to round back to when you're rounding things off. And we've already got the wide point line here established for this would be represent the widest point of the bird. It comes back to the base of the tail and then carries on into here. So everything that you round off will be rounded away from, like all the rounding will be done away from that line in both directions. We're not wanting to round off too much on the underside here. We just kind of basically around this portion of the body. We want that looking nice and round. So I think I've got enough reference lines marked in there for now, because at this point, I just want to make everything as round as I can. Once we've got these eye positions established, the rest of it is relatively straightforward to do. So to do this, I'm going to use a Foredom tool with a fairly good size 5/8 inch Typhoon or 5/8 inch Saburrtooth burr. And I'll just get the dust collector going. And so what I want to do when I'm rounding this off is I want to round from one line to the other line and make everything as round as I can between these two lines, as round as I can, and then round as I can from this line to this line, all the way along here, and from here to here. I will, when I get into the facial disc, I'll have to do a little bit of concave carving in there, but I'm still making things round from the outside of the eye to this line, just trying to make everything round. We'll show you how that looks later. But to get started, what I want to do is I just want to round off. And rounding involves just getting rid of any corners or flat spots. That's what rounding involves. Now, you could use a knife for this if you wanted. You could use a knife, or you could use A smaller tool, it's like a micro motor, just going to take you longer. A lot of times when I'm working on my carvings at home, I like roughing them out with a knife. It tends to be a little slower using a knife than using a power tool, but it's more peaceful, a little quieter. And it really doesn't matter what kind of tool you're using for this rounding off, whether you're using a hand tool or a power tool. The important thing is that you get everything nice and round. Now, in order to round right down to the bottom of this tail line, I will need to cut off some of that like that. Don't want to go through my center line. I want to make sure that the cutter comes close to the center line. But when my cutter's approaching the center line, it should be almost flat on the back of the bird. It shouldn't be at an angle, otherwise you end up with a sharp point on the top of the bird here. And you want to avoid that if you possibly, well, definitely want to avoid that. So I've coming pretty good here, rounding off the top part of the bird here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn things around and I'm going to start working to round off the side a little bit better. Now, when you get into a little indented area on the neck like this, like there's a little bit of an indent here, when you get into something like that, you've got to carry that indent around on the neck. You can't just round things off without and have a dent there without having a little bit of a dent elsewhere. As you see here, I'm rounding off the head between those center lines. And if I just kind of concentrate on doing the back part of the head here, getting as round as I can, keeping in mind, roundness is an exercise in getting rid of any flat spots and any corners. You can see that the head is getting rounder. And when you get closer to the finished roundness, you got to maybe lighten up your touch a little bit. Don't push quite so hard. Take your time. But see, in order to be able to round off that top of the head, I have to continue this little groove in here a little bit of a dent. And then I'm very, very light touch with this cutter. And I'm just kind of smoothing off the wood surface a little bit. So if I was just working on this at home, not doing a video, I just kind of keep going around the bird. I just keep working my way around. You can see how round this is looking now. There's no flat spots. There's no corners. A little double check that I quite often recommend, especially to beginners, is to take some sort of a flat straight edge or something like that. Now you can see very easily that this is flat along here. But when you start putting it on the rest of the bird, there shouldn't be any spot that you've carved where the ruler or the flat edge comes to rest anywhere. It should just barely touch wherever you're touching here. And you want to keep everything as round as you can so that it's not coming to rest. I've got a tiny little bit of a flat spot near the center line here on the back, but I'll sort that out. It's very close to being round. I'll sort that out when I do my final little bit of touch up on it. So you get an idea how that rounding works. And a good place to start for you might be just to work on not on the face side, but on the back side. If you do the back side, might be a little easier, help you get warmed up a little bit, and then we'll get into the front right away here. So one thing when you're working with these saber-tooth burrs, any burr that's really aggressive like this, is you want to be careful. If I was to take this burr and put it on the edge here away from me, it might want to grab and run. So if I'm going to be carving on this corner here, I should always be carving so that the cutter is coming off the wood this way. If I tried going the other way, it would very likely want to grab and run around. And it can be a real problem if you're holding a finger here and it grabs and runs around. So you want to be aware of that. The way I try to explain it to my students so that they can remember is whenever you're using a cutter like this, when you're coming off the edge of a cliff, you should only come off the edge of a cliff where you can see where you're going. If you try going the other way and go off the edge of a cliff, you can't see where it's going. That's a dangerous cut. So if you're keeping that in mind, that would be it if you're running the cutter in the forward direction. Like I'm running my Foredom tool in the forward direction right now, where if I look at it from the front here, it's from the top and front, it's turning clockwise. That would be forward. Now you'll notice when I'm rounding here and I get to the bottom, I just kind of keep on going straight off the bottom. I'm not trying to round this piece on the very bottom. I'm just trying to round the side. And this part where the base of the tail is, you don't have to do much with that right now. We will round that off more when we start working on the tail and on the feet and the lower part of the bird here. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create the roundest shape possible from this center line to this wide point line. Make everything as round as I can going through here. Got a few things sitting on top of my dust collector, and they're kind of blocking the light a little bit. So just move that out of the way there. Maybe people see it a little bit better now. So the blank that I'm carving right now is cut from a piece of tupelo. Generally the wood of choice with most of the more experienced bird carvers, especially like working with tupelo. Now tupelo excels when you're using power tools like this. I'm using the Foredom. Tupelo's a good choice to work with the power tool. It does work okay with hand tools as long as your hand tools are really, really sharp. If you've got exceptionally sharp, really, really sharp hand tools, you can carve tupelo quite nicely with them. But if your tools start getting even a little dull, you'll find that tupelo can be frustrating to work with hand tools. But with power tools, it works very nice. The grain is not as finicky as with many other woods. You can kind of go against the grain and you don't get a bunch of buzzing and weird things happening with it. I've got the back part of the bird round. You'll notice here, it's faded a little bit, but you'll notice this line that I had in here. I'll just draw it in a little darker so you can see it. This line that I had in here for the widest point on the bird. When I'm finished rounding this, that line is still intact. And same with on the front, when I go to round everything off, that line will still be intact. So what you can do, you may find this a little easier just to round off everything below the neck to start with and get the bird body rounded off, which is what I'm going to do here. I'm running the Foredom tool pretty much flat out. They got a little variable speed foot control on them, and I've got it right to the floor. Yeah, not pushing real hard. Let the cutter do the work. Also, when you're running the cutter over top of your piece of wood here, if you only go in this cutting direction, like, you know, this is the more aggressive cut when you're pulling it towards yourself. If you only go in that cutting direction, sometimes you end up with a little bit of a washboardy. It might dig in a little bit for you. So I actually like letting it run back, like carve and then let it run back. And that running back quite often will give you a smoother result, less washboard, less digging in, especially if you're not pushing real hard with your cutter. So as I get closer to the center line, this cutter gets up flatter and back and forth, coming close to this line, but don't cut through it. But I can round off the top of the tail just and there's just a little bit, but this will work itself out later anyway. So I'm not really worried about that. And let's just get the last part of the body going here. Now, these saber-tooth burrs are available in various grits as well. The green one is what they call a coarse grit. And I find that's kind of my favorite for general roughing out. Some people prefer using the yellow fine ones um, because they leave a little smoother finish. But as you'll see in a little bit here, I'm not terribly concerned about the finish here. I'll be using a little cushion sander to smooth off and sand this. So now you see the body is quite well rounded off. You look at what's happening with the body there. There's not really any flat spots or corners. There might be a little tiny bit, like there's a bit of a bump there, which easy to break that off. When you see stuff like that, you can just knock it down. Um, so now what I'm going to do, I've got the body rounded off. I'm going to come in here and round off the head. And this is start with this corner here. One of the ways to think about this is how would you round it off if you hadn't carved those eyes in? Try to not think about the eyes when you're doing this. Just round it off to your wide point line here. You're rounding from the center line and rounds back and away from there. So now this little corner here, if you were sometimes going in here and taking that, it might want to grab and run on you. So I would just, to be on the safe side, come from this direction so that I'm pulling the cutter towards myself when I'm rounding off this part of the bird. And you'll see I got to get rid of all my flat spots. Like there's a flat spot across the front here. And I've got to come in and round off that part of the head there. So I get everything rounded into that center line. This needs to be round going this way, but also needs to be round going up onto the top. Not cutting through my center line here, my wide point line. I want that to stay intact. That's very important. Kind of rounded that off a little bit. I'll start on the other side here. Looks kind of odd, doesn't it, with that one big piece sticking out there. So we're carving that little bit of a groove in at the base of the neck, rounding off the facial disc into the center line. Right into that center line. So I'm not pushing very hard. I'm just kind of using this light touch back and forth to try to maybe smooth things off just a little bit. With a lighter touch, I get a little bit less grooving from this cutter. And the cutter is still leaving some grooves, but I'm using it to kind of come back and smooth things off a little bit. Going over the whole bird here, there's a little bit of I see a little bit of a bump there. So he's mostly rounded off here. The basic body is rounded off. Here's a trick that I always suggest to people. You want to see if it's rounded off properly. Take the bird, wrap your hand around it, and close your eyes and roll it around in your hand. And if you've got a high spot or something that's not quite round, especially if you close your eyes and roll it, you'll feel it. I'm feeling a bit of a squareness happening right in here that I can feel when I rub the bird. So I'm going to come back here and take a little bit off there. Try to make it feel a little less square. The biggest problem most people have when they're carving birds and that kind of stuff, everybody's afraid of taking off too much wood. But in the process, many of them don't take off enough wood. So I feel this and it feels nice and round now. I got rid of that corner. And up in the top here, there's maybe a little tiny bit of a corner right there that I want to just knock down. Sometimes you can feel them and you don't even hardly see them until you feel them. And then you look at them and go, oh, well, yeah, I can see it now, but I couldn't see it before I checked to see how round it felt. So now we've got feels pretty good to me. Feels nice and round. And I think where I'm ready to do now is I'm ready to carve in the facial disc and get that done. To do that, I'm going to switch back to my micromotor tool. Go back to the micromotor tool with a about a quarter-inch ball nose burr on it. I could do, and if you want to, you could use your large saber tooth here to do some of the basic stuff. But you may find for a lot of you might find that's a little too aggressive. If you're comfortable with using a cutter like this, by all means, it will work well. But this one's a little more controllable. So I'm running it at about 30,000 RPM. And what I want to do now is I want to come in here and round off the inside here, kind of make a bit of a, this is one of those places where I do actually want a little bit of a peak at the top of the center line here. I don't want this super round or anything. I want a bit of a peak there. And with the eyebrow on the top, what I want to do is I just want to try to round things off a little bit, take off as little wood as I can, but enough to make things round. So you can see that developing on the top of the eye here. And same with underneath the eye, the lower side here. You have to bring this down a little bit. So you're kind of leaving where the bill is. You're creating a little bit of a groove in there. Not too much though. You're probably better off leaving it too full rather than carving off too much. And to get this down on the bottom, round that facial disc down. And where the eye is concerned, you'll need to bring the back of the eye, smooth off. You don't carve in the inside up here very much. You carve mostly on the back part of the eye. And you just kind of keep on going in there and working that down until you get rid of that little shelf that you had in the back there. It just needs to keep coming back and angling back until you get a little closer to this center line here. Coming a little closer to that. You're really trying to do with this ball nose bird, just kind of smoothing a lot of stuff off. You know, there is a facial disc there that needs to stay, but the eye needs to come in at an angle. We can refine this facial disc further when we've got the basic rounding done here, and then we can draw that facial disc on and finish up. But you can see the difference in the way that looks now. So we'll just go ahead and do the other side. Oh, see it grabbed there on me. Fortunately, I wasn't pushing very hard, so we'll be able to resolve that without any problem. I'll just smooth it off a little bit. Coming back and rounding as much as I can as I approach that center line there. And I'm going to just come back in here now and start to carve off the back end of that eye there until I get rid of the, just want everything looking nice and smooth. A little bit more of that eyebrow. Smooth that off a little bit. So now I just want to look at it, and if there's anything that looks bumpy or lumpy or um, a little bit too full, just want to take a little bit of that down. Once again, an exercise in getting rid of flat spots and corners. Look here from the side, you can see how that eye is in from the side. This one is in from the side. You can see the depth of the facial disc. The other thing that happens just kind of automatically when you do this is you get this angle to the well, you can see that angle on the front of the head here. This is the a lot of owl patterns. You'll have a view that shows you this angle on the where the brow and the eyes and everything is. And that just kind of happens because it happens correctly because you put those eyes in the right position to begin with. A lot of people, when they're carving owls, don't put the eyes in deep enough. That's probably one of the most common errors. They leave the eyes sticking out way too far, and it loses the proper look for the owl. And I saw a little bit of a lumpiness there on where the eyes are going to be. To smooth that up. And so now we've got the owl basically roughed out now. That's the overall basic shape of the owl. That's a rough out. I haven't done anything on the bottom here. I don't do anything on the top of the tail really, other than a little on the edges, until after I've finished working on the wingtips in the texturing process. So that's that. Now, I'm just going to do a little bit of cleanup and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so I've got everything carved, and now what I want to do, because you can see there's some, the scratches and lines from that more aggressive cutter, big Saburrtooth. So now what I've got this little foam, it's a cushion sander, and you don't want to use these ones at full speed. You want to use them at, maybe half speed on your Foredom. You don't want to go too fast with it, but at lower speed, uh, don't have to push real hard. The thing that's nice about these though is because they're on a foam backing, they'll kind of follow the contour of whatever you're carving, and you can use the end of it to kind of come into some concave areas and smooth off any, if there's a little spooned out area or something. Now, when you're doing this, it's okay to go through at this point. At this point, it's okay to go through your center line, but I would strongly recommend drawing it back in again. So once you've done a little bit of it, just draw your center line back in again and then do some more sanding. That way you're not going to lose your center line. Now, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but as you can see from what I'm doing here, this makes you sanding so much quicker than if you were to sit there with a sandpaper and you sand it by hand. It just makes everything go way, way faster. The end of a forbidden rid tool mark. Also, keep in mind that we're going to be drawing feathers on here. We're going to be carving some feathers. So the surface that I'm creating right now, nice and smooth, is still, I'm still going to be doing some carving in the surface. So it doesn't really have to be perfect, but you want it looking pretty good. So it's a good time to stop now and just, when I still got some line visible here, sketch that line back in again. So you get an idea how smooth that is. I'll just finish sanding this down off camera and be right back. So I've sanded most of this. I'm just going to get in here with the end of this cushion sander and use it to smooth off. Yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect, but this will get rid of a lot of the roughness. Just a real light touch with the tip of these things. Make quite a difference between before and after. And again, just a light touch. Don't need to be pushing very hard. And lower speed. You run these too high a speed, sometimes the paper can come flying off and stuff like that. So I think pretty much got the smoothness done. So that's the roughing out. We've got the owl roughed out and smooth, so everything is round. And what we're ready to do now is we're ready to start drawing the feathers on, and we'll be doing that in our next video.